Move on to Jim Knight, our speaker for this evening. Jim started his IT career nearly 4 decades ago as a junior programmer, methodically working his way up through the ranks to ultimately become the Global CIO of Chubb Insurance. Jim worked for Chubb for 20 years, and for his last 9 years at Chubb, he was the Global CIO. His time at Chubb concluded in 2016, and shortly thereafter, he ventured into his new career as an IT management consultant, and then launched his career coaching and empowerment coaching business, aptly called Knight Insights. Knight Insights partners with clients to help them achieve career and personal goals. Some of you are probably very familiar with Jim. Jim is very well known within the SIM community as being a SIM New Jersey member since 2004. He's held various positions in the SIM New Jersey chapter, including VP of Programs, Executive Vice President, and also VP of the New Jersey SIM Foundation. Jim's also been very active in SIM on a national level, starting in 2010, being on the SIM National Board as Vice Chair, then Chair, and then Chair Emeritus. And he's recently served as the SIM Chief Executive in 2018-2019. And as of January of this year, he's the Regional Leadership Forum National Director. Something that he knows very well is Regional Leadership Forum, which is referred to as RLF. He brings hands-on experience to the program, considering that during Jim's tenure as Global CIO of Chubb and that of his predecessor, they sent well over 200 people through Regional Leadership Forum program, which is just a staggering number of people to go through that program. To this day, RLF is widely considered one of the most popular and effective offerings within SIM nationally. So with that being said, please join me in welcoming Jim Knight.
Thank you, Kevin. Give me a minute to bring up the slides, and I'll share the screen. Oops, not what I wanted to do. Everyone see that?
I still see you. I think you have to reverse the screen.
Okay, hold on a second. Maybe I didn't share yet. Hold on.
Jim, if you'd like, I can share, and you can just let me know when to advance the slides.
Okay, let me. Can you see it yet or no?
No.
You know, I might need to be given host back.
You are. According to the controls, you have host controls. Okay. Tell you what. Let me see if I can share, and then okay. and we'll see if that and then I can just advance the slides for you. Can everyone see the Jim slides now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I will go to full screen. Okay, Jim, just let me know when you want me to advance the slide, okay?
Okay. Stay there for a second. Welcome. I hope everyone's doing well, and thank you for joining this meeting. I'm very glad to be here to share my thoughts regarding managing your career with clarity, and I'll talk about what that means in a second. The majority of the conversation will be about managing a career from inside out. I'm going to focus on the most impactful period of my career ascension that serves as a microcosm of my entire career. Specifically, I'll speak about a 3-year period where I was in a highly competitive situation to become Chubb's Global CIO. What ended up being my strategy in this regard can just as well be an overall career strategy in general. I'll speak probably for about 30 minutes and use the rest of the meeting to field questions and have a dialogue. As Kevin mentioned, feel free to type in questions as they come up in the Zoom Q&A feature. Slide 2, please. So let's jump in. Ever since I took a computer math class in 11th grade, I knew I wanted to work in the computer science world. What's more, I was always intrigued by the concept of leadership and sought out opportunities to lead. As a result, there's a little mystery to where I ended up in my career, to be honest with you. When I was in my second year of college, I got my first job as a junior programmer. From there, I continued to pursue my bachelor's degree in computer science, followed by a master's degree in information management systems. Did that part-time while working full-time. I was always a conscientious type worker, perhaps an overachiever at times, who, over the years, as mentioned, rose through the ranks and earned a reputation as a, let's say, make it happen professional. And while a divisional CIO, out of the blue, during that tenure, the Global CIO, Chuck McKay, called me to tell me he was retiring and that I should consider posting for the job. Honestly, I didn't think I was ready. But of course, I was going to give it a shot. One peer of mine and I were the only two who were being considered. After a few months and a series of interviews, they in fact did conclude that we weren't quite ready for the role. However, they brought in June Drury out of retirement to develop Chubb's next global CIO over the next 2 to 3 years. June was a well-seasoned CIO and especially skilled at leadership development, so I had another shot at it. But it would be a situation where I and 4 others would be under the microscope in what I called the 3-year horse race. So now, let the competition begin. And it was serious competition when you consider that all 5 candidates had the opportunity to do what was needed to be done to be selected for the job over the next 3-year period. It was quite intense and definitely a time for me of personal and professional growth, and for me culminating with me being awarded the job. Considering all the work that I did to get there, the transition for me to June was pretty seamless. I credit June more for that than I do myself. But what's more, I, with the help of my team, successfully executed the role over the next 9 years, including a major IT transformation that realized both significant financial savings and major productivity increases. Some of you may remember me speaking about this at a SIM meeting a few years back. As mentioned, I left Chubb when the ACE acquisition was complete. It was at this point that I started the consulting and leadership / career empowerment coaching business that was just mentioned, called Night Insights. And when I did that, I employed a similar strategy that I'm going to talk about today for getting the Global CIO role. In addition, as Kevin mentioned, I'm the National Director for SIM's Leadership Development Program, RLF. Throughout this presentation, I'll share vignettes about the horse race and other career experiences that worked for me with the hopes that it helps bring more clarity to your career strategy. Next slide, please. First, let's look at what got me on the radar screen, what I consider table stakes for anyone who wants to excel. I use the term lead here both as a verb and an acronym. Regarding lead, I did my best to lead across all levels, up, down, and across, including leading myself. I definitely took responsibility for my career with a focus on being, let's say, a victor versus a victim. I'm sure you've heard the saying, if it's going to be, it's up to me. That's kind of what my mantra was. While there are many aspects of leadership, the one that most was important to me was to focus on doing the right thing as best I could, not the most convenient and not the most self-serving. Then you get on to execution. How you execute is important as getting it done. We live in a time when we have to do more with less. I did this by attempting to work smarter versus harder, thus being as productive as possible. I'm a fan of methodologies, frameworks, fit for purpose, reliable processes, in effect, doing it the right way. Furthermore, I was a planner and thoughtful regarding my approach to my work. I planned it out and thought it through before executing. In this regard, I subscribe to the Carpenter's guiding principle, measure twice, taught once. Then we have adapt. The world is constantly changing. Look what's going on now with COVID. Well, look at the speed of technology change. Things routinely change and at a rapid pace, as we can see now, sometimes unexpectedly. As mentioned, I plan things out, but I look to master the plan. I don't let it master me, which allows me to be flexible and agile through the execution phase of whatever I'm doing. And perhaps the most important is to deliver. Be it a project, a strategy, a contract negotiation, etc. If you don't deliver on your commitments, the game's over. I was obsessed with this. Failure was never an option for me. And when possible, I would strive to exceed expectations. And to be 100% honest, I'm kind of proud of my delivery track record. Do we need to pause a second? I'll wait till we get the screens fixed. Steve, are you getting that?
I'm not sure what's happening. Did I stop sharing?
I see it, but it stopped, and you're out of slideshow mode.
Okay, let me see what I can do. All right. That better?
No. Oh, here we go. We're there. We're
Okay.
there. Okay, very cool. So like I was saying, I'm proud of my delivery track record. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, getting it done, right? So that's what got me to the starting gate. From now on to the race and what got me across the finish line. Next slide, please. What fueled me throughout the race was clarity in what I wanted, to be a leader in the technology world. There was no ambiguity for me. I also knew why I wanted it, for the challenge, the sense of purpose, and the impact I could have. The perks and the money that go along with it, of course, were nice, but not my driving force. This clarity had the power to pull me and drive me to focus on the right things. Clarity, both as a noun and an acronym, as you can see in the puzzle, is what was behind my success. The combination of these 7 pieces of the puzzle came together as my strategy. Some of it I brought into the race, and some of it I developed during the race. I suggest that if you can employ a career strategy of clarity, you may be that much closer to achieving your career goals. Next slide, please. Most of my career, and certainly during the horse race, collaborators were instrumental in my success. Collaborators being defined as those folks that support you in general and are in agreement with where you're heading. And in my case, the aspiration to be the global CIO. For me, they include an internal coach, an external coach, mentors, advocates, and some of my team and other allies in general. A few are on this call today. They were not only there for me for advice, guidance, and feedback, but also help convert and influence the folks that either didn't support me in general or didn't agree with my pursuit of the role, perhaps because they were aligned with one of my competitors. As important, they also helped me understand who my adversaries were, especially the less obvious ones. Adversaries being defined as the people who didn't support me and didn't agree with the pursuit of the role, my pursuit of the role. It's helped me be selective regarding who I brought into my circle. The one thing that surprised me, however, was the advocates that I had. I did not realize how much I earned their respect. What's more is that I likely earned their respect because of the things that got me into the race, the table stakes I mentioned earlier. A quick story that demonstrates that point. Early in my career at Chubb, I inherited a very troubled, mission-critical project. Not only was the project very visible and in serious trouble, but made matters worse, the relationship between the business unit and IT was seriously strained. Hatfield and McCoy's type strained. In the spirit of doing the right thing and not letting failure be an option, the project was turned around and was successful. I literally gave it my all. What's more, and very unconventional to the Chubb culture, I even asked for some of my other responsibilities to be taken away so I can focus on being successful here. Then, one day, the business unit leader, Dino Robusto, had a conversation with me when it was clear we were going to be successful. He said that I was doing a great job and I was going to be the CIO of Chubb someday. Now, keep in mind that I was an assistant vice president at this time and only at Chubb for a year up to this point, 10 years before I actually got the job. I honestly thought he was, let's say, pumping ice cream just to flatter me and to keep me motivated. However, over the rest of my career, my Chubb career, he was both an active mentor and a loyal advocate. He's now a CEO at CNA Insurance Company. We recently had dinner and reflected on that conversation. I asked him if it really meant it and that I thought it was just to flatter me. He said he absolutely meant it, that he saw in me real character, someone who cared, someone who would do what it takes to get it done, and someone who was committed to doing the right thing. He went on to say that we could teach you the competency side of a job, but finding someone who has the right character is not nearly as easy to come by. So, am I glad that I gave it my all, worked many late nights, weekends, and gave up other responsibilities to be successful here? Absolutely. There's also something else about Dino and some other collaborators that is worth mentioning here. People who really support your aspirations are not shy to give you feedback. They tell you what you need to hear versus what you want to hear. Even though there were times that required me to be very thick-skinned, I considered this a gift, as I knew I didn't know everything and actively sought out and made good use of the feedback, regardless of how much it stung. An example, I remember each of us had to present to the executive committee our business unit IT strategies for that year. We each took our turn, and I felt I did okay, but I felt my main competition did much better. As I was walking out of the meeting room, my boss at that time, the gentleman Mike Marchio, said to me, "Your presentation was okay. Mark's was exceptionally better." Ouch. You know, suffice it to say, the next time I upped my game, and Mike helped me do it. When I got the job, I asked what made the difference for me. One of the top reasons that I was told was that I was coachable, that I demonstrated the ability to receive feedback and proactively do something with it, with the right mix of humility and confidence. Now, in my coaching business, I'm a bit selective. I make sure the client is very open to advice, guidance, and actionable feedback, and willing to act on it, the recipe for success in any coaching relationship. Next slide, please. We have leverage. Leverage is about fully utilizing the resources available to you to gain disproportionate strength. These resources include your collaborators, your network, your strengths, your opportunities available to you, and information. I already talked about how I leverage my collaborators, and we'll talk more about that as we go on. As for networking, I'm sure you've heard and know the importance of networking. This was an area I had to develop. I had to make a very conscious effort to build my network. For me, my desired approach was to find ways to work with people. All the positions that I held in SIM that Kevin mentioned, as well as working on the Accord board, that's an insurance standards board, working on the Somerset County YMCA board, and on a community tennis board, serve as a few good examples where I worked with people and got to know them. Through these alone, I've met and have gotten to know many, many people, and I know that I can and have called upon them many times when needed. For example, I've had a fair amount of coaching clients since I started Night Insights, and almost all of them came from recommendations from the folks in my network. Conversely, I've also been there for them and helped them many times in the past. To this point, it's very important to remember that reciprocity is the currency of relationships, and each relationship is like a bank account. It's good to make deposits so that you can make withdrawals when needed. Now, regarding my strengths. So self-awareness, feedback, experimentation, and I guess reflection, I grew to understand what my strengths were and capitalize on them as best I could. On the flip side, I better understood where I wasn't so strong, and for the most part, developed compensating measures. Now, as a coach, I come across so many people who either don't understand their strengths or seriously undervalue them. And I would just seriously ask you to ask yourself, do you understand your value? Do you understand and value your strengths? And are you fully utilizing them? Then we have leveraging opportunities. Look for or create opportunities to market yourself, to showcase yourself, and to learn. A couple of examples for me include when I volunteered to help out our HR department work through a major issue with a system implementation that the company's HR outsourcer was imposing on them. It was a highly politically charged situation and in deep, deep trouble. I saw the opportunity to show what I could do by utilizing my project management background, my ability to collaborate, my commitment to doing what was right. And it worked. This runaway project was successfully turned around, and what I'm grateful for is that I really didn't step on any political landmines. I was able to demonstrate some of my skills and even gained a few advocates and allies along the way. Case in point, the HR manager in charge of the project and I became close professional allies. And from that point on, there were more than a handful of times that he was there to help me or advocate for me when I needed him. Another opportunity I successfully pursued was to run the enterprise IT governance process. This was an area where my competitor was highly skilled. I asked for a shot at it, and it was granted as a development opportunity. I rose to the occasion and was successful. I was able to demonstrate that I could effectively work with other senior executives and my peers, some of which were competitors, and be as good as anyone else at it. Finally, one area many people don't think about enough is the value of information. To excel at situational awareness, know what the real reality is. Our perceived reality, or what they call naive realism, is a product of what we focus on times the limited information that we have. For example, as we all know, politics is alive and well. You can imagine the politics that went on during the horse race. considering the combination of my own focus and let's say vigilance and purposefully seeking out information, mainly from my collaborators, I was more aware of the political landscape and was able to keep it in check. Next slide, please. It's no surprise that your attitude or thoughts make a tremendous difference. Think about it. Your thoughts lead to emotions, and your emotions lead to actions. So it goes to stand that negative thoughts, more times than not, lead to negative outcomes, and positive thoughts, more times than not, lead to positive outcomes. Think self-fulfilling prophecy here. As Henry Ford once said, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. During the horse race, I had doubts, and my inner critic was alive and well. But as time went by, let's say through self-awareness, coaching, and reflection, I learned to challenge that voice in my head. I'd say I doubled down on myself. I started to play to win versus playing not to lose. For example, early in a race, I felt like the odds were significantly against me with one of my competitors. I was behaving that way. The same guy I referred to earlier. He was 6'4" with a good executive presence, very smart, gregarious, highly skilled, knew how to market himself way better than I could. My inner critic was absolutely having a field day with this one. But I worked with some of my collaborators, including an internal and an external coach, to challenge my not so productive thoughts. And over time, it made a significant difference. Once again, in my work as a coach, I often come across many people feeling that they are not good enough in some way or another. If this is you, to some extent it likely is because you're human. Lean on your collaborators, get a coach if you don't have one, challenge that reality of you. Remember, perceived reality is the product of focus times information. And if you focus on the positive things and have reliable, comprehensive information, you'll be situationally aware. Double down on yourself. And as you know, if you think you can, you are aware, or you're well on your way to success. As Winston Churchill said, a person who takes full possession of his mind may take full possession of anything else he's justly entitled. Next slide, please. The horse race was one of the hardest things I had to do in my career. There were more than a few times I was discouraged either from not doing as well as I thought I could have, from making a mistake, from letting my inner critic get the best of me, from an unfavorable change in circumstances, or from a competitor just knocking it out of the park. But true to my nature, I persevered. I sought feedback and advice constantly and was in learning and adapt mode. I took the lead and would not let myself be a victim. My purpose was clear, and it gave me the strength that I needed. I did my best to maintain a balance through exercise and meditation the best I could. And as mentioned, key relationships, especially with my collaborators, were my support system and my information pipeline. If something went wrong, I reflected on it, learned from it, and made sure it didn't happen again. And when faced with a challenge or a task that I hadn't faced before, I took time to think it through, how I could employ my strengths and skills to get to the result I wanted. And lastly, I was fueled by the guiding principle, failure is not an option. There's a book called 212, The Extra Degree, and it clearly gets at the idea of resilience. The main point is that at 211 degrees, water is hot. At 212 degrees, it boils. And with boiling water comes steam. And with steam, you can power a mighty locomotive. That one extra degree, that one small final step can make all the difference. As the saying goes, achievement does not require extraordinary ability. It comes through ordinary abilities applied with extraordinary persistence. I feel pretty confident that I don't have extraordinary abilities. Slide 9, please. Next slide. Likely the biggest change in my approach to landing a job was changing it from an obsession to an intention. The first few months of the horse race, I was in competitive overdrive. I was uber critical about everything I did. It gave me energy. It gave energy to my inner critic. Every time the competition did something well, I would go home and kick the proverbial dog. I was obsessed with trying to figure out how I could outshine the others. Then, around 5 months into it, I realized I can't keep this up for a few years. It was a marathon, not a sprint, and I clearly was sprinting. I did lots of reading to learn a better approach. I leaned on my collaborators, especially an external coach, and reflected a lot. I learned to appreciate the power of intention, the power of a focused mind. I changed my approach to focusing on what I want, but not obsessing about how I will get it. I learned about what I'll call it, what I truly think is a phenomenon, that the brain is like a GPS. Tell it your destination, and it will present or recognize opportunities for you to get there. It's like the law of attraction, where you think about manifest. And think about it. It's not until you buy a new car that you realize how many other cars are the same as yours. They were always there, you just notice them now, because your brain has it on its radar screen. So this bears repeating. Once you realize what you want, your brain will look for the path to get there. This idea of intentionality gets at the point that without it, you have one idea obsessing about the outcome, and on the other eye, and only one eye on how to get there. With intentionality, it was liberating for me and allowed me to release a lot of negative energy. I no longer worried about or was distracted by the competition. Instead, I focused on my energy on being the best Jim Knight I could be. I started to behave like a global CIO. I did what I could in the present moment. It was like driving at night. I knew where I wanted to go, and with both eyes on the road, not just one, I could only could see 50 feet in front of me. I did what I needed to do every 50 feet and stay true to my intention, and successfully arrived at my destination, that being the job, the Global CIO role. So the more you know what you want and why you want it, the more the power of intention works. Next slide, please. Now on to transformation. Over a lifespan of a career, the more you advance up the career ladder, the more you'll have to transform. Many things I spoke about up till now were all about me transforming to the best I could be. One area I want to focus on here that I haven't mentioned is a transformation from a frontline worker to a senior manager. The saying, what got you here will not keep you there, is so true. As we progress up the management ranks, our technical skills are required less, and our leadership, interpersonal, and strategic skills are required more. This was a transformation I had to make, and it wasn't the easiest. I had the personality of a project manager, more than a strategic thinker. But thanks to June, coaches, and other collaborators, and my own grit, by the time I got into the role, I was comfortable and felt good with all this. So as you climb each rung of the career ladder, it's important to further hone your leadership, interpersonal, strategic skills, which is critical to success. It's another common area where people seek me out for coaching. I can't tell you how many times in my corporate role, and certainly as a coach, I see a great technician was promoted into a manager role, struggling with that transition. Next slide, please. As I mentioned in the beginning, I knew what I wanted and why I wanted it. I yearned for it. I had no lack of clarity. I had complete lack of clarity here. It's what fueled everything I talked about up to this point. My yearning inspired me to attract and leverage my collaborators, as mentioned, to leverage my network, my strengths, the opportunities. It gave me the motivation to optimize my attitude, to weather mistakes and disappointments, to be intentional and everything that comes along with that, and to go through the most impactful transformation of my career. There's a saying that whoever wants it most will get it. I don't know for sure, but I believe I wanted it most. The idea of being the global CIO of a Fortune 250 company, I was inspired and motivated. So what is it that you want most? Why do you want it? And how committed are you to getting it? Do you have the clarity you need? Do you have a cadre of collaborators to serve your support team? Are you leveraging all the resources available to you to gain disproportionate strength? Do you have a can-do attitude, and are you playing to win versus playing not to lose? Do you have what it takes to persevere through the tough times? Are you living a career of intention? Are your leadership, interpersonal, and strategic skills where they need to be? Once again, do you know what you want, why you want it, and how much you want it? As Mark Twain said, it's not the size of the dog in a fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. Take the lead in your career, own it, be the victor. You know, as I look back at my career, it worked out for me. But I do wonder at times about, was some of it just luck? But then again, when you think about luck, luck is nothing but preparation meeting opportunity. So with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Jim.
You're welcome.
We do have a couple questions here that I'll read to the group. What changed when you finally got the job, and how did those relationships that you built along the way serve you?
Great question. So, you know, I have to credit June for, you know, she was the one we brought in for leadership development. You know, I obviously did the work, but that transition was seamless. So not much necessarily changed for me. I was even surprised how seamless the transition was. Of course, the level of politics is greater. But added to that too, at that time, Chubb, we already knew the current CEO was going to retire in about 2 to 3 years. So there was definitely another horse race going on with much more intense politics between my boss and another gentleman. So getting caught in the middle of that many times, and those of us who are in IT know we're an easy target at times. So I even had to up my game even more with politics. And honestly, sometimes I did well, sometimes I could have done better. As far as the people, they were there. The funny thing is, at first when I got the Global CIO role, I reported to the Chief Administrative Officer of the company. Well, because the COO left, he moved on to another job, and this gentleman I mentioned earlier, Dino Robusto, took over his job, and now I reported to him. And that was part of the change. So he, up to this point, was always my mentor, my advocate, like I talked about. But so he was one of them. HR, the folks I talked about, were there for me pretty consistently, the ones that, especially the gentleman I work with. The internal coach I had at that point was no longer with us, but I still, had an outside coach, and I even do have coaching done with me today. And then just in general, I'm the type of person that, if I can get someone's advice or thoughts, and I would tell the team at times, I never have an original idea. I just throw out there the problem and kind of brainstorm with everyone else, and then the better ideas come about. So hopefully that answered the question.
Sure it did. And just so everybody was aware, that was from Mark Taylor. We have another one here. This is from an anonymous attendee. How have you handled supporting the needs for the business and business partners when these objectives were at odds with the CFO or your boss? Right? You mentioned do the right thing, but what about when your boss or other senior executives don't view it with the same perspective?
Yeah, it's a campaign where you have to negotiate, you have to influence. I mentioned along the way the transformation we did, right? That wasn't easy to sell. We spent, oh boy, easily, me and a small task force, spent easily 4 or 5 months behind closed doors, planning that out, how we were going to do it, what the financial benefit would be, and the productivity increase as best we could judge at that point. And what happened was, after that, and we got the executive committee to kind of line up with us, I went on a roadshow and kind of went through everybody, but our case was strong. It's back to kind of what I said earlier about being thoughtful and planning. We really thought it out. We really anticipated any questions, and it worked. But let me continue with the answering the question. If it's a big project, or we had a decent governance process. And one of the things I admired about Chubb is that in our business case process, if you said, you meaning the business side, said that they were going to, after this project, that the next year they could save 10 people, reduce the staff by 10. In our 5-year planning, so to speak, we would take those people out at that point when we were doing the planning. We didn't wait for the project to be done. So they had skin in the game and really had to line up with the benefits. So that was another way we did it. And really, many times it was just brute force, not brute force in the sense of forcing it, but just continually dripping water on a stone to make what happened. Chubb was a very flat budget type environment. We're very expense conscious. And the folks that got what they wanted are the folks that kept coming back. Kept coming back.
Yeah, got it. We have one from Baya Jin. Looking back at your journey, one thing you wished you would have known back then, and what would you have done differently?
Great question. I have more than one answer for that question. I think everything worked for me, but it could have went better. The power of relationships, I cannot understate. It really, and sometimes I didn't even realize until I reflected on it. My whole career, someone was there for me, an advocate. From when I was a junior programmer, a project manager, I always had someone in my corner. Sometimes I made it happen, sometimes it happened, right? So the power of relationships and networking is important. But one of the things that, and probably many IT people can say this, I wish I knew how to market myself better before then. I just didn't. You know, I even think at a first go around for getting a CIO role, where I was, you know, I didn't get it, but was tapped on the shoulder. What if my attitude was a little bit more, no, I could do this, versus a little bit sheepish about it? Maybe I would have got it. I'm glad I didn't, because I like, in hindsight only, I like that 3-year period where I learned a lot. But marketing yourself and doing it in a way that doesn't sound like you're pounding your chest is a skill not many people have. And any kind of network/relationships, I could have, you know, doing that sooner would have even helped me even more. Great question.
It was, no doubt. We have one from Doug Gable. Once you reach the goal of Global CIO, what coaching for yourself, skills development for yourself, and networking did you continue to do? Yeah,
onto the coaching for myself. You know, it was more situational, I guess. You know, I talked about the politics of the horse race for the CEO. That was pretty tough. And to be honest with you, I fell into a few times where I could have done better. I'll give you one example. You know, my boss, Dino, was very demanding. Always pushing. I got myself an executive coach. I asked him for it, you know, pretty much as soon as I got the CIO role. And he was happy to do it. HR worked with me. We found the right person for my personality. And I remember my boss was getting frustrated with me. And I really couldn't figure it out. You know, we had so much going on, so many projects. I was feeling a little, me and the team were feeling a little overwhelmed. And I had a conversation with the coach. And I told him this. And we did some role playing. And he said to me, I got it. And what I was saying to Dino when I was pushing back on things, I was using the pronoun I. I don't think we should do this. I don't think it's a good idea. I all the time. He said to me, chances are your boss thinks you don't want to do the work and is not really hearing what you're saying. Change the pronoun to we and change the dialogue to we. And I got to tell you, that changed the game for me. I mean, all of a sudden, you could tell by his body language and how he dialogued with me that he was in the game with me. And he understood, I'm not being, you know, just someone who doesn't want to do this. I'm out for really trying to get to the right answer, right? And I think the rest of the question was about networking.
Yes. How do you continue to keep up with networking?
Yeah, I definitely kept up with networking. Matter of fact, more so, but for different reasons, right? I mean, I knew I had a job, but, you know, to understand what was going on in the technology world, shoulder to lean on, we know as CIOs that we all have the same problems, right? I could go out of industry, out of insurance, and go to pharmaceutical or whatever, and talk to their IT CIO, and we talk the same language right away because we all have the same problems. And you know, Sim, very much so, especially on the national side, I met lots of people, and we would chat about things. Sometimes just someone to, you know, we're facing a situation we haven't faced before, you know, from an implementing technology point of view, especially I could think of a time with cybersecurity, right, where I leaned on a network to get ideas on what was going on. Also, to find people. And also, I helped them find people too, right? I mean, the reciprocity idea is very, very important in networking. So things like that, I definitely kept the network up, increased it in some ways. In some ways, you know, some of the people fell off the radar screen and vice versa. Great question.
Great. This is from Milo's topic. What's the major differences in primary areas of focus when it comes to divisional versus global CIO roles?
You know, divisional is a great breeding ground, to be honest with you, but it's against one business unit typically, right? So like we had, between all the functions in the business units, I think we had 12. Maybe 10, including, and then 11 if you include shared services, right? So 3 major strategic business units, then a lot of functions and so on. So I went from running 1 to running 11, you know, having 11 report under me, right? So just the magnitude, and all with their own problems, all similar in nature, but just different, and some in different let's say along the spectrum at different points. But also the politics is definitely much more intense at that level, right? And also, you know, I joke, but there's some truth to this. You know, almost the day I got the Global CIO job, my haircuts looked better, my suits were better. everything all of a sudden, you know, I was like, okay, something changed overnight because I didn't just get a haircut. I'm wearing the same suit I wore yesterday, stuff like that. But on the other side, there's also more stress. I'd be lying to say there wasn't.
Gotcha. So this is from David Plotzker. Walk us through how you get from technical leadership skills to strategic skills. What type of opportunities should be on the lookout for, and how can we seize them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I work in coaching on this as we speak, right? And first understand what you mean by strategic, right? So, and there's times I even struggle with this depending on the situation. And so I would define strategic as, you know, first of all, strategy is a set of activities cohesively put together to get to an outcome, right? Then when you look at that, you know, but you're not just looking at the near term, like you're considering what's coming in the future, right? So like I talked about in the talk earlier, right? A project manager, which I was, and that's how I kind of really excelled up to before I went into more department management and so on. That was, in a project, it's day by day, right? You're dealing with an issue each day, and of course you have the view of what's coming, what you want to achieve at the end of the project, but you're so in the weeds dealing with firefighting. So it is about finding strategic opportunities, working with the business, for example, to help them define the technology strategy. And that's something I did when I was in the claim department. And the cool thing there is, and I'm not sure, I bet you most of you agree with this, most IT folks anyway, that there was a time when the IT strategy would, the business strategy would cascade down to the IT strategy. Now that happens, but technology and IT also influences the business strategy. So we have an opportunity to get out in front of this and work with the business and share with them what's going on in the world. When I was in the claim CIO, the divisional CIO role, I took the lead with a little help from a few folks to introduce predictive modeling in the claim process. And I had to do it in a way that I made it their idea, didn't matter to me, but we did it and we implemented it on the works comp side. And I got to tell you, it saved hundreds of millions of dollars over years. Like months at a time, it was in the $70, $80 million range we were saving by that predictive modeling. So that's one way, just get out in front and work with the business and think about how technology can help them. It's also changing perspective. What you're looking at today, what impact does it have? Be considerate of where, whatever your role is, whatever department you're working for, is going to be in 2 to 3 years, and consider that. IT governance, the one that I kind of volunteered and kind of want to get up to speed on, was another way I was able to kind of be more strategic as we did prioritization of the different projects. So that helped. Did I answer? I hope that answered the question.
I'm sure it did. Absolutely. So here's one from someone I think you may know from your Chubb days, Barb Mastriani. She'd like to know how you keep current now. And basically, if you're not working in quote unquote corporate America, what are your sources? How do you keep current these days?
You know, it's funny, when I left Chubb, and there was a small period of time I thought I was going to get back into corporate, but I gave up an idea. I always wanted to do consulting anyway, so here was my opportunity. You know, and I had lunch with a person in my network, this guy Larry, and he was in the same boat as me, just a couple years ahead. And he said, it's about networking. Stay in touch with people, learn what's going on. That plus the consulting work helped, you know, and honestly, and this gets back to the transformation I talked about earlier with that transformation shot. I don't need to know the ins and outs of technology anymore. I just need to know what it's about, meaning its value, and how to implement that value. That makes it easier for me to keep in touch. You know, if I had to know how to, you know, implement a cybersecurity tool or middleware or whatever, it's not going to happen. But understanding what the tools are, you know, like for example, there's north to south type protection. There's also east to west protection. Those in cyber will know what I'm talking about. Things like that I keep up on. You know what? There's a possibility I don't know what I don't know. I think I keep up on most. Not quite sure.
Yep, got it. So this is back to Mark Taylor, who asked a question earlier. What were the trade-offs that you had to make along the way?
Definitely, you know, the work-life balance was out of balance for sure along the way. I did my best, and maybe I got fair grades here, of helping, you know, working with the family. Did I give up on a lot of personal stuff? Absolutely. So that was definitely a trade-off. You know, a few nights rest for sure with some trade-offs. What else? You know, honestly, during that 3-year period, and I think that might be where you're focusing your question, I was also charged up, especially when I got over this, you know, competition with everybody and started focusing on me. It became more, I'm not going to say fun, because it wasn't fun, but more of a challenge in a positive way. And I'm definitely a sucker for a challenge. So the trade-offs were really that, my work-life balance and, you know, just the aggravation and the constant, let's say, pressure of that 3-year interview, let's call it.
Okay. So this is from David Mangold. How do you solicit feedback? Are there ways you can cut through the usual quote unquote, you're doing fine, bland responses?
Yeah, that's great. You know, it's funny, David, when I first, you know, would approach people with feedback, and you could kind of read their body language and, you know, okay, they don't want to tell you what you really got to know, right? Some, like I said, were very happy to do that. I changed the question. All right, you know, they would say, Jim, you're doing great, great job. I would change the question to, all right, that's great. I'm doing great. I would be better if blank. And then I would leave it blank and ask them to fill in the blank. And I got to tell you, that worked. You know, they really like started to go into it. You know, because sometimes they don't want to hurt feelings. It's back to what I mentioned earlier, you know, tell people what they need to hear versus they want to hear. A lot of people would tell you what you want to hear. So to your question, you know, you push like that. And then it is how you react. You know, if you react in a very sensitive way, in a very like leave with your tail between your legs type way, you're probably gonna not get as direct feedback from some people, right? So it's how you take it in. And I did take it in, and I was very appreciative about it. I let them know that you know, that it's great, I get it. I may have had more questions or something like that, but that's how I did it, and I got my share.
So this is from Greg Shand. Knowing what you know now, what would you say to Jim Knight as his coach 20 years ago?
Oh, a little bit, don't sweat the small stuff, first of all. You know, me being conscientious and, like I said, an overachiever, you could get in a habit of like beating yourself up for everything. And then along the way, one of the people that worked for me had this saying, just about anything, any question we were debating, what difference does the difference make, right? And that stuck with me. And then I started to realize there's certain things like, and matter of fact, I tell people this now, when they're challenged with something at work, and you know, most people I know, I'm sure almost everybody on his phone, if not everybody, is very conscientious. So when you drop the ball a little bit, you kind of beat yourself up. I got in a habit of thinking, in 2 days from now, will anyone remember this? Is this that big? You know, to use another metaphor, is it a pebble in the water and only little ripples, or is it a big boulder in the water with big ripples, right? So understanding not to sweat the small stuff and kind of be a little kinder to myself, I definitely would have said to myself. Back to the earlier question about, I would definitely look to more actively network. Back then, I didn't know, let's say, what my preferred way of networking was. And then I realized I'm not the type of guy that I'll go to cocktail parties and all that, and I'll small talk. My eyes glaze over about a half hour into it. But when I work with somebody on a team and we have a shared goal, that's when I bond with them, be it the boards I'm on, is I volunteer for a lot of stuff, otherwise stuff like that. That's what works for me. If I would have kind of really paid attention to that more back then, and kind of really knew that, I think I would have been better off from a network point of view. What else? That transition to, you know, from a technician to a, you know, senior leader, you know, it was a bumpy road for me for a while. And just understanding that, I always liked management, but when I learned what project management was, like I said, I was a sucker for a challenge. I got absorbed into being the best project manager I can, and I know it. I didn't focus as much on strategy and had to be strategic, but I caught up later. So I'd say those are the things I'd tell the 20-year-ago Jim.
Okay. So this is from M. Glacken, which is either Mary or Dennis. How have you handled situations where a key leader was not an ally?
That's a depends answer. You know, I had, you know, I learned by the time I was in the race that I did have advocates like I didn't know I had before this. So I leaned on them. But it was also, if you remember that chart I put up, if you got a chance to really look at it, about collaborators, right? If they are adversaries, I kind of kept my distance, right? But I also stayed close to my boss. And one thing I knew about my boss, I mean, I thought I handled politics okay. He was a master at it. So either advice or providing air cover for me, he was there. But there were times, I remember, there were times because of that horse race I talked about would be for the CEO, the CFO was in this also. And when we were doing the transformation, I was doing the pitch, the roadshow for the transformation. Him being one that wanted the CIO role, the CEO role. I was in there, just me and him, going through my presentation. He puts the deck down. He looks at me and says, "Jim, I get it. But the target's completely on your back now." Because we used to be a federated model, we're going to a central model. And back to what I always do, back to intention. If my intentions are right, usually the right thing happens over time. I looked at him straight in the eye. His name was Ricky. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Ricky, I know, but this is the right thing to do." He looked at me a little, I think, befuddled, and said, "Okay, let's do it." Now, in fairness, he's a CFO. He saw we were saving a lot of money. So, I'm sure that had a lot to do with it. But it's very individual. It's getting people to help, in the influencing game around someone who's who let's say is an adversary. And it's be careful not to drop the ball because they will pick on you.
Sure. So this one is from, forgive me, I'm going to butcher your name, Nanye Triout. I apologize, but transitioning from technical to management is a big challenge. We go to school for start a career, but then transition into management. As you continue to climb the corporate ladder, how did you grow your interpersonal, politicking, management, and overall leadership skills? Kind of lends itself to one of the original questions, but a little bit of an add-on to those, I would think.
Yeah. Well, first, I had to make up my mind that that's what needed to be done. And honestly, I felt my leadership skills were decent. I wasn't as concerned about them. Like I said, honestly, I don't know what it was, but when I was a kid even, I always found myself in leadership positions, either in things we did as a friends group or whatever. It's just something I always did. But as far as the strategic and the interpersonal skills, I mean, it's really just, first of all, making up your mind that's what you're going to do, right? That you want to change that. And it is actively learning how to do it, be it public speaking, be it, communication, active listening was very, very key for me. And there's definitely things we did. I was even in a book club within Chubb about, around this one book, The Zen of Listening. And I would do things like that. But it all back to intention. I had the intention to be more interpersonal and to be more strategic. And then opportunities, you kind of hardwired yourself then to look for the opportunities, or when an opportunity came up, you chased it down.
Okay. So we're at a little after 6 o'clock. We had till about 6:15. The questions keep mounting and mounting. So we have about 15 minutes left here. So this is from Rich Signa. Can you talk about the techniques you've used in managing peers? Some of the next rung, some that reported to you, and especially when you attain global CIO role. What are some of those managing techniques for peers?
Yeah, first of all, I'm going to plug RLF here. Like we said, we sent lots of people to RLF, and that is a tremendously good development opportunity. And I know, I'm not biased because I'm running it now. I'm running it now because I love it. And like I said, between June and I, we sent over 200 people. And RLF gets at a lot of the things that I talked about today in my strategy, right? And the facilitator is just phenomenal. And I've sent, in sending people, one person I remember only went because she realized everyone else was going. And she went like, not really kicking and screaming, but not with all the enthusiasm in the world. After I think the third session, she came back to me and said, "I get it. This is life-changing," right? So things like that, development opportunities, also growth opportunities. There's one person that, this was more when I was in claims, but still it's appropriate to the answer, is that he was the type of guy that would cross every T, dot every I, and would be obsessed about making sure everything was tick and tied, right? I remember we were looking for someone to fill a role. It was part of this when we were doing re-engineering all the claim systems, and it was the integration manager. And we needed someone with precision that would really pay attention. This guy, you know, I gave it to him and he was like, are you sure? I'm not sure I'm up to this. And we were there to follow him and watch him and give him a safety net. So that was part of it. And the other thing is too, you know, I had people, especially when we were doing the claim project, there was folks outside of that project that honestly I couldn't pay as much attention to because the project was consuming me. And you know, I went by the motto: if you have a thoroughbred, let them run. And she did a great job running, you know, the production support side of the team. So it was that. And then also, you know, carrot and stick. If they're not doing well, you have to hold them accountable. If they're doing well, you got to let them know. You know, I think I did that okay. I know it was always on my radar screen to do that. But I would say, and I'm probably falling back on I learned by experience. So putting people into actually having the experience so it sticks is what I would like to do. Hopefully that answers the question.
This is, sort of lends itself to this question a bit. This is from CC Puglia. How important is it to develop, influence, and inspire your direct reports and their teams? How did you accomplish this as you were focused on your trajectory?
You know, and actually, I'm gonna sell CC out. She was one of my direct reports when I was in the divisional CIO, so she lived this. She's the one that actually did a great job of handling production support, while my eyes were more focused on the project, the re-engineered systems. You know, one of the things is by example. You know, another thing is by you know, and that was a challenge. I'd be lying to say it wasn't a challenge to kind of manage that while kind of doing this big project, aiming to be the next global CIO, and then, you know, influencing too. It's about leadership, right? And one of the things is leadership. It's not about being liked. It's about being respected, but it is about doing the right thing. And, you know, when we did this transformation, and first we did it in the claim department. The one I just when I got to global CIO, we did the claim department, claim IT department first. And we made some tough decisions. And some people who really were there for me during my role as the divisional CIO really didn't fit the new model. Nothing against them. They were phenomenal, but they just didn't fit the new model. So, you know, made tough decisions. And all the people that fell in that category found jobs within weeks. So it was partly, you know, making those right decisions, doing the right thing. I'm trying to reflect back to that specific time. You know, RLF, like I said, I guess things like that. What else did I do? You know, in certain cases, it is about also trying to be as motivational as possible. Also, you know, another thing that we did, I really, really enjoyed in Claim IT when I ran that, was we had a lot of events, you know, just to bring people together and create that bonding. And if people socially bond at work, there's a better chance than not they're not going to leave. And we'd have at least 2 major parties a year, like an Oktoberfest and a holiday party, maybe even a spring thing, stuff like that. Some more collaborative things like that too. But also I usually had a theme in terms of, you know, one of the theme when I was in Claim IT was make it happen, but it was IT. So make IT happen. And we did a whole bunch of stuff around that to kind of keep people focused. So long-winded answer, but hopefully that got to it.
Absolutely. So this one's from Doug Gable. Keeping it light, tell us your favorite interview question you asked to find the right person for the job you were looking to fill.
All right. I guess I don't interview anymore, so I could do this. Actually, it's funny because I do have a series of 3 questions that really tell me a lot about a person. And it's more about the character than it is the competency. Usually by the time they get to me, we figured out the competency. The first question is, you know, 5 adjectives that describe you. Easy, common question, right? The next one, and to the person, I catch them off guard, partly on purpose, but partly it gives me something else. I ask them to describe their kitchen. And I usually get like, what? I couldn't prepare for this question. And that tells me how they communicate. Some people tell me how in their cupboard, the soups are all lined up in alphabetical order, labels facing out. Other people don't even talk about what it looks like. They talk about the feeling of it. And it's the place where they congregate. It's the family place, stuff like that, and anything in between. And then I circle back and say, think about your favorite person and give me 5 reasons why that's your favorite person. I don't need to know who it is, but just tell me that. And if those 5 reasons don't line up with the 5 adjectives they talked about themselves, the 5 adjectives about themselves, they were stretching it.
Okay, this one's from Anonymous. How did you manage divisional IT versus corporate IT? And when you did get to the global role, did your perspective change?
It did. You can imagine, you know, because we had shared services, you know, corporate IT. I assume you mean corporate IT, including shared services. We had a unit called corporate IT that did like the functions, like HR and finance and so on and so forth. So I'll assume you mean corporate IT, like shared services and infrastructure and all that. I mean, I typically, for the most part, I got along with everybody, but I was frustrated. You know, and we had a model where, you know, you sometimes for shared services, especially, you had to hand off some stuff, let's say for testing or something like that. It was frustrating not to have that control but I also had the pressure of having to deliver these projects. When I got to be the Global CIO, I absolutely now got to understand their challenges and why the divisions, you know, could have been better at, you know, working with them. So it was a two-sided street there. But I definitely got more enlightened, and for the best I could, I tried to bring that together. Centralization definitely helped that.
So this is a great question from Sharon Woodward. What's your best coaching advice in the current work from home environment? How can we rise above others and remain visible while working virtually?
Oh, great question. So, you know, first I would say, you know, in general, these are tough times, and, you know, even myself, you know, what is this, day 50 something? I absolutely thought I'd be going out of my mind by now, but I'm not. And, you know, I'm using the time. I mean, I got stuff to do, which helps, and I go out for walks and, you know, so on and so forth. But to the question, it's really just get it done. Matter of fact, now is an opportunity. The more someone could get something done when the situation has changed, the more it demonstrates what you have to offer, right? So, you know, but it does get back to my point earlier, and, you know, what I wish I knew how to do sooner in my career was marketing. Marketing's harder now because you don't see each other as much. You don't have those hallway conversations and so on. So being more creative in marketing, and there are definitely ways to do that, right? And even if it's, you know, and you're one-on-one, kind of being okay to pound your chest a little bit, but in a way that doesn't sound too, you know, let's say cocky. Also, you know, if the stress of it's getting to you, is take the time to reflect, you know. And, you know, I just had a conversation with someone yesterday and a couple of days ago too, is that this work from home thing, they're actually more stressed. They're actually doing more work because it's there. They're not, let's say, delineated by a commute. It's just easy to sign on to the computer and, you know, get some stuff done. So it's that balance too that you have to worry about. But I would say, you know, I haven't thought about it that much because I'm on my own really, but I would say if you could find ways to market yourself, keep the work-life balance, and look for the opportunities in this crisis. You know, there's a saying, don't waste a crisis, don't waste it.
So you have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions here. This is from Himanshu Pandit. As a global CIO, did you implement any formal career development plans for potential gyms, as well as did you support tenure, birding, rotation for middle management via stretch assignments?
At first, when we were federated model, less of the stretches, less of the move into different positions. When we went to the central model, absolutely. We put people in different roles, you know, and as much, Chubb IT was such that, you know, we were aligned with the business unit, and you really, if you're on the IT team aligned with that business unit, you know, they wanted you to stay there, and it's hard for you to get out. When we centralized, we moved people around to do different things like SWAT team approaches and all that, so that helped. Also, can you repeat the question? I might have missed part of it.
I actually dismissed it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can't go back to it, unfortunately. I apologize.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Sorry about that.
That's okay. We can move on. We can move on. This one's back to Dennis Glacken. How did you ramp up on the areas that you didn't know as well when you got the global job?
All right. So this, you know, by the time I got the job, right, I already knew and kind of was prepared enough to deal with the, more about leadership and interpersonal skills and more about strategy than technology, right? Example, case in point, in my whole career, I never had anything to do with infrastructure. Never ran it. I knew it, of course, at an IT manager's level, but I never ran it. I never had anything to do with it, right? But I had the right person, right? So when it came to anything below me, I was happy with the team. Some, of course, like any team is they could always use some bolstering up. And finally, we had probably, I would say one of the best teams I've ever seen. But, also politics would be a great example. And I said it earlier in the presentation, collaborators, network, I leaned on them. The collaborators also helped me look for, am I missing things on the periphery that maybe I should be dealing with? And there's times I did miss a few things. Thankfully, I caught them in time and dealt with it. But the network becomes so important. Relationships become so important. I was part of a couple of consortiums where I could keep in touch with the bigger goings on in IT, technology world. But if I knew that I was lacking, I would definitely pursue it with collaborators or on my own or whatever.
Okay. And this is the last question, and I think you may have answered this from a different person, but this is from Greg Shand. Again, in your presentation, you talked about the role of advocates in terms of your growth and reaching the global CIO role. How did you deal with the adversaries when charging to the top of the pyramid?
Great question. Part of my this wasn't part of my strategy, but it's part of who I am. You might not think of it from this presentation, but growing up in that role, I had more of an unassuming personality. And I really got the impression that people didn't take me as real as they should have. That's in hindsight, by the way. And like I said early on, I didn't take myself as real as I should have, right? So that was part of it, but it was really relying on the collaborators. Greg knows who I'm talking about. This guy, Dino, was one of them for sure. He was in my corner. And when I was challenged, I had coaches inside and out. HR, even some of my peers, there was factions, some people preferred someone else to get it, some preferred me to get it. I knew the person who preferred me to get it, so I also used them. And sometimes, it's, they got me. Don't let it bother you. Go to the next thing, move on. It's like any politics, governmental, corporate, whatever. Sometimes you just got to take the bullet and move on. There were definitely some times like that too. But that also helped in terms of how I dealt with it. If I was frustrated or pissed off, excuse the language, they didn't know it at work. They knew it. I knew it after I left work, but I tried to maintain a demeanor. And I think that helped. I don't know for sure, but I think it did. So hopefully that answered the question.
Absolutely. So that concludes the Q&A section. Jim, I just want to thank you so much for doing this, for the chapter and all your efforts and your time here. I'm sure Steve has a parting word, so I will turn it over to him.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you again, Jim, for an excellent presentation, and especially for taking the time to answer the questions of our meeting participants. That was really excellent. So just a quick reminder, we have some other virtual meetings coming up, and I hope you can join us for those. There's others currently being planned, so please watch your email for future events and for updates about what's going to happen in the fall. Just one more reminder that NJSIM is a member-led organization. We need your help to keep it going. So please contact me if you have any ideas about how we can improve services, what you would like to see in terms of programs for the summer and the fall. And finally, I want to ask you to watch your email for a brief survey about tonight's presentation. That's going to be going out to participants early next week. With that, thank you all very much for participating tonight. Jim, thanks again for a great presentation and a great Q&A session with everybody.
The opportunity also.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Stay safe.